A Tale for the Time Being. Novel by Ruth Ozeki. Part 2. In reality, every reader, while he is reading, is the reader of his own self. The writer's work is merely a kind of optical instrument, which he offers to the reader to permit him to discern what, without the book, he would perhaps never have seen in himself. The reader's recognition in his own self of what the book says is the proof of its truth. Marcel Proust, Les Temps Retrouvent. Root. The image on the screen shows a man in his late 30s or early 40s, standing before a vast field of tsunami debris that stretches into the distance, as far as the eye of the camera can see. The man is wearing a white paper face mask, but he has tugged it down to his chin in order to speak to the reporter. He is wearing tired sweatpants, work gloves, a zippered jacket, boots. He raises his arm to gesture toward the wreckage behind him. "It's like a dream," he says. "A horrible dream. I keep trying to wake up. I think when I wake up, my daughter will be back." His voice is flat, his utterances short. "I've lost everything. My daughter, my son, my wife, my mother. Our house, neighbors. Our whole town." The caption at the bottom of the screen gives the man's name, T. Nojima, sanitation worker, Oak Township, Miyagi Prefecture. The newscaster, his voice muffled by a face mask, speaks to the camera. He explains that they are standing on the site where Mr. Nojima's house used to be. The scene is one of total devastation, but what the camera cannot pick up is the stench. He pulls the face mask down. The smell, he explains, is unbearable, a choking odor of rotting fish and flesh, buried in the wreckage. Mr. Nojima is searching for his 6-year-old daughter. He has little hope of finding her alive. He is looking for the backpack she was wearing on the morning of 11th March when the tsunami hit. "It's red," Nojima says, "with a picture of Hello Kitty on it. I just bought it for her. The school year was starting and she was so proud of it. She wore it in the house. She was going to be entering the 1st grade." Nojima and his daughter were at home in the kitchen when the wall of black water and debris smashed through their house. Within seconds, Nojima was crushed up against the ceiling and his daughter was gone. He thought he would drown there, but miraculously the house was ripped from its foundation just as the ceiling gave way, and he was pushed through onto the 2nd floor and into the bedroom, where his wife was crouched in a corner, holding their infant son. "I tried to catch her hand," he says. "I almost had her, but then the house tipped and split in half." His wife and son were dragged away. He thought he could still reach them. He managed to scramble onto the roof of a passing concrete building. He could see his wife in the corner of their floating bedroom, holding the baby, but she was being pulled farther and farther away. He called to her. The roar of the water and the crashing debris was deafening. It was so loud, but I think she heard me. She looked at me. Her eyes were wide, but she never once screamed. She didn't want to scare the baby. She just kept watching me until the end. He shakes his head as though to clear further recollection from it. He stares out over the debris field, splintered houses and crumpled cars, cinder block and tangled rebar, boats, furniture parts, smashed appliances, roof tiles, clothing, stuff, a ghastly midden pile several meters deep. He looks down at his feet, poking at a muddy tangle of fabric with the toe of his shoe. "I will probably never find my family," he says. "I've lost my hope of giving them a proper funeral. But if I can just find something, just one thing that belonged to my daughter, I'll be able to rest my mind and leave this place." He swallows hard and then takes a deep breath. "That life with my family is a dream," he says. He gestures toward the ruined landscape. "This is the reality. Everything is gone. We need to wake up and understand that." 2. In the days following the earthquake and tsunami, Ruth sat in front of her computer screen, trawling the internet for news of friends and family. Within days, she received confirmation that the people she knew were safe, but she couldn't stop watching. The images pouring in from Japan mesmerized her. Every few hours, another horrifying piece of footage would break, and she would play it over and over, studying the wave as it surged over the tops of the sea walls, carrying ships down city streets, picking up cars and trucks and depositing them on the roofs of buildings. She watched whole towns get crushed and swept away in a matter of moments, and she was aware that while these moments were captured online, so many other moments simply vanished. Most of the footage was shot by panicked people on their mobile phones from hillsides or the roofs of tall buildings, so there was a haphazard quality to the images, as if the photographers didn't quite realize what they were filming, but they knew it was critical, and so they turned on their phones and held them up to the oncoming wave. Sometimes an image would suddenly blur and distort as the photographer fled to higher ground. Sometimes, in the corners and the edges of the frame, tiny cars and people were caught fleeing from the oncoming wall of black water. Sometimes the people looked confused. Sometimes they looked like they were taking their time and even turning back to watch, not understanding the danger they were in. But always, from the vantage point of the camera, you could see how fast the wave was traveling and how immense it was. Those tiny people didn't stand a chance, and the people standing off-screen knew it. "Hurry! Hurry!" Their disembodied voices cried from behind the camera. "Don't stop! Run! Oh no! Where's Grandma? Oh no! Look! There! Oh, this is horrible! Hurry! Run! Run!" In the 2 weeks following the earthquake, tsunami, and meltdown of the Fukushima nuclear reactors, the global bandwidth was flooded with images and reports from Japan, and for that brief period of time, we were all experts on radiation exposure and microsieverts and plate tectonics and subduction. But then the uprising in Libya and the tornado in Japan superseded the quake, and the keyword cloud shifted to revolution and drought and unstable air masses as the tide of information from Japan receded. Occasionally an article would appear in the New York Times about TEPCO's mismanagement of the meltdown, or the government's failure to respond and protect its citizens, but this news rarely made the front page anymore. The business section carried gloomy reports about the cost of Japan's cascading disasters, deemed to be the most expensive in history, and dire projections for the future of the country's economy. What is the half-life of information? Does its rate of decay correlate with the medium that conveys it? Pixels need power. Paper is unstable in fire and flood. Letters carved in stone are more durable, although not so easily distributed, but inertia can be a good thing. In towns up and down the coast of Japan, stone markers were found on hillsides, engraved with ancient warnings, "Do not build your homes below this point." Some of the warning stones were more than 6 centuries old. A few had been shifted by the tsunami, but most had remained safely out of its reach. "They're the voices of our ancestors," said the mayor of a town, destroyed by the wave. "They were speaking to us across time, but we didn't listen." Does the half-life of information correlate with the decay of our attention? Is the internet a kind of temporal gyre, sucking up stories, like geodrift, into its orbit? What is its gyre memory? How do we measure the half-life of its drift? The tidal wave, observed, collapses into tiny particles, each one containing a story. A mobile phone, ringing deep inside a mountain of sludge and debris. A ring of soldiers, bowing to a body they flagged. A medical worker clad in full radiation hajmat, wanding a barefaced baby who is squirming in his mother's arms. A line of toddlers, waiting quietly for their turn to be tested. These images, a minuscule few representing the inconceivable many, eddy and grow old, degrading with each orbit around the gyre, slowly breaking down into razor-sharp fragments, and brightly colored shards. Like plastic confetti, they're drawn into the gyre's become center, the garbage patch of history and time. The gyre's memory is all the stuff that we've forgotten. Ruth's mind felt like a garbage patch, an undifferentiated mat of becalmed and fractured pixels. She sat back in her chair, away from the glowing screen, and closed her eyes. The pixels lingered, dancing behind her eyelids in the darkness. She'd spent the afternoon watching clips of bullying and harassment on YouTube and other video-sharing sites in both the United States and Japan, but the clip she was looking for, the tragic and untimely death of transfer student Nao Yasutani, which according to Nao had once gone viral, was nowhere to be found. She rubbed her hands up and down across her face, kneading her temples and pressing her fingers into her eye sockets. She felt like she'd been trying to suck the girl out of the glowing screen with the sheer force of her will and the fixity of her eyeballs. Why did it matter so much? But it did. She needed to know if Nao was dead or alive. She was searching for a body. She stood and stretched, and then wandered downstairs. The house was empty. Oliver had received a large shipment of dawn redwood seedlings, which he was planting over at the Nuyucene clearcut. He'd left early that morning, whistling the dwarf's tune from Snow White. Hi-ho, hi-ho. Nothing made him happier than planting baby trees. The cat was outside on the porch, waiting for him to come home. It was 4:30 and time to start thinking about dinner. As she passed by the dining room, she caught a whiff of the fishy odor of barnacle death. The smell was stronger now. She walked to the telephone, picked up the receiver, and dialed Callie's number. "They're goosenecks," Callie said, examining the barnacles on the freezer bag. "Polycypes polymeris. Order Pedunculata. A gregarious pelagic species, not really native, but it's not uncommon to find them on tide rack that's drifted in from farther out at sea." She glanced across the kitchen at Ruth, who was heating water for tea. "Is this the bag you found below Gudrun and Horst's place?" When she spoke with Callie on the phone, Ruth hadn't mentioned where she'd found the bag, but Callie hadn't sounded at all surprised to hear from her and had offered to come right over. It was almost as if she had been expecting the call, but of course Callie was helpful that way. She was a marine biologist and environmental activist who ran the foreshore monitoring program on the island and did volunteer work for a marine mammal protection agency. She made her living as a naturalist on the massive cruise liners that plied the sheltered waters of the Inland Passage on their way to and from Alaska. "The belly of the beast," Callie said. "Those cruisers are the people we have to reach. They're the ones who have the resources to make change happen." She often told a story about the time she was standing on the deck of a ship bound for Anchorage, pointing out a pod of humpbacks to the excited passengers, who were crowded around the railing, snapping pictures and shooting video. One elderly man stood apart from the rest. When Callie offered him her place at the rail so he could get a better view, he laughed derisively. "They're just whales." Later in the cruise, she gave a lecture about the order Cetacea. She showed video and talked about their complex communities and social behaviors, about their bubble nets and echolocation and the range of their emotions. She played recordings of their vocalizations, illustrating their clicks and songs. To her surprise, the old man was in the audience, listening. Later, they spotted another pod, which came closer this time, treating them to a spectacular display of surfacing behaviors, breaching, spy-hopping, lobtailing, and slapping. The old man came up on deck to watch. At the end of the cruise, as they were approaching port in Vancouver, the old man sought her out and handed her an envelope. "For your whales," he said. When she thanked him, he shook his head. "Don't." They disembarked, and Callie forgot about the envelope. When she got home, she found it and opened it. Inside was a check made out to her Marine Mammal Protection Agency for $500,000. She thought it was a joke. She thought she had miscounted the zeros. She sent it into the office, and they deposited it. The check cleared. Using the passenger list, she tracked the old guy down at his home in Bethesda and questioned him. At first, he was reluctant, but finally he explained. He had been a bomber pilot during World War II, he told her, stationed at an air base in the Aleutians. They used to fly out every day, looking for Japanese targets. Often, when they couldn't locate an enemy vessel, or the weather conditions turned bad, they would be forced to abort their mission and fly back to base, but landing with a full payload was dangerous, so they would discharge their bombs into the sea. From the cockpit of the plane, they could see the large shadows of whales moving below the surface of the water. From so high up, the whales looked small. They used them for target practice. It was fun, the old man told Callie over the phone. What did we know? They're filter feeders, Callie said, about the barnacles. But they're not very good at moving their CV around, so they rely on a vigorous movement of water to get their nutrition. That's why they prefer more exposed shorelines than ours. What's a CV? Ruth asked, putting 2 mugs of tea down and then pouring a third for Oliver, who had just come back from tree planting. He took off his jacket and hung it up, and then he joined them, with the cat following hard on his heels. Cheers, Callie said, taking a sip of the tea. Cirri are the barnacles' arms and legs. Feathery tendrils they use to pull plankton in. I don't see any feathery tendrils, Ruth said. She didn't like the barnacles. They were ugly and they gave her the creeps. They only extend them when they're underwater, Oliver said, wrapping his reddened fingers around the warm mug. And anyway, these guys are dead. Ruth inspected the barnacles, which looked pretty much the same as they had when they were alive. They were attached to the freezer bag by long dark stalks that were tough and rubbery and covered with small bumps. At the free end of each stalk was a hard white cluster of plate-like shells that looked like fingernails. Callie used the tip of her pen to point to one of the rubbery stalks. Pesto jumped up onto the counter to watch. This is the foot, or the peduncle, she said. And this hard white part is the capitulum, or the head. The cat sniffed at the barnacle, and Ruth pushed him away. Does it have a face? She asked. Not exactly, Callie said. But it's got a dorsal side, which is up, and a ventral side, which is down. She took a small plastic box from the pocket of her fishing vest and opened it. Inside was a collection of forensic instruments, a scalpel, a pair of tweezers, forceps, scissors, a small ruler. She selected the largest barnacle and used the scalpel to slice carefully between the plastic bag and the base of the peduncle. She removed the barnacle and laid it on the counter in front of her. She took out the ruler and measured the creature from foot to head. Can you tell how old it is? Oliver asked. Hard to say. They reach sexual maturity at about a year, and full maturity at 5. They can live up to 20 years or more. This fellow, or girl, actually it doesn't matter because they're hermaphroditic, is a mature adult. They can grow up to 20 centimeters, or about 8 inches long, but this one's only just over 3 inches, which suggests that the colony is fairly young, or the conditions weren't great, or both. Hey, Oliver, can I test drive that scope on your iPhone? He had recently hacked his iPhone by attaching a small 45x digital microscope lens onto the case with superglue. Somehow Callie already knew about this, too. She had just gotten back to the island. How could she know? She held out her hand, and he snapped the case mod onto the phone, opened the app, and passed it over to her. The app activated the iPhone's light as she aimed the lens at the barnacle's head. A close-up image appeared on the small screen. This is awesome, she said. You see these gorgeous calcareous plates? Ruth peered over her shoulder at the small screen. The plates looked like toenails on the foot of a prehistoric reptile. When they're first secreted, they're shiny and pearlescent, but gradually as they're buffeted about by the waves, they get pitted and dull. Like us, Ruth said, sitting back down. Exactly, Callie said. So that's another clue to age. All in all, I'd say that this colony's been floating around for at least a couple years, probably more like 3 or 4. 3 years puts it before the tsunami, Oliver said. Well, like I said, it's hard to be more precise than that. But it seems unlikely that we'd be seeing stuff from the tsunami washing up on our beaches yet. We're tucked in pretty far back here. She turned off the light on the microscope and admired the lens. How would you attach it? As Oliver explained the hack, Ruth picked up the severed barnacle between her fingers and studied it. This new information added little support for her tsunami theory. Perhaps Muriel was right after all. Perhaps the freezer bag had been jettisoned from a ship, although now didn't seem like the type to take an Alaskan cruise. Maybe she had cast it out to sea, like a message in a bottle, before the tsunami, or maybe it had been in her pocket, along with the rocks, when she walked into the ocean and drowned. Any of these were plausible explanations, but none of them felt right. Ruth didn't like the barnacles to begin with, and now she resented them for failing to provide the evidence she was looking for. Why are they called goosenecks, anyway? She asked. They don't look anything like geese. Callie had returned the iPhone to Oliver and was packing up her kit. Actually, they do. There's a kind of goose called a barnacle goose, which has a long black neck and a white head. Your little friends here were named for it. People used to find these guys attached to a piece of driftwood, which they assumed was a branch from a barnacle tree. They thought the capitula were eggs laid in the tree, and that the barnacle geese hatched from them. It's a reasonable chain of assumptions, but of course they were entirely wrong. Assumptions suck, Ruth said. She put the barnacle down on the counter, and Pesto, who was waiting, promptly snatched it and ran off with it. He carried it to the middle of the kitchen floor and dropped it, took another sniff, and then turned up his nose. He wouldn't deign to eat an already dead thing. They're a great delicacy in Spain, Callie said. The peduncle is especially tender. You boil it for a couple minutes, peel off the skin, hold it by the shell, put the foot in your mouth, and pop. She pantomimed this, making the sound with her lips. Meat slips right out of the shell. Dipped in a little garlic butter and lemon, yum. It was just before 6, and already quite dark outside. Ruth took a headlamp and they walked Callie to her truck. Looking up, she could see that the clouds had parted and a full moon was lighting up the sky. In the moonlight, the treetops were threaded with pale tendrils of mist, but below, the boughs of the cedars were dark and heavy with the rain that had been falling all day. The beam of her headlamp caught a shape in the branches. Hey, is that your jungle crow? Callie asked. Focusing her light, Ruth could see the gleam of black feathers and the glint of a jet-black eye. Muriel, she said, as though it were the answer to Callie's question. Callie laughed. Of course, she said. But everyone's talking about it. Our local nativists already have their knickers in a twist. Why? Why do you think? Callie said. Invasive species. Exotics. Black slugs, Scotch broom, Himalayan blackberries, and now jungle crows? She turned to Oliver. Speaking of exotics, how's the Covenant War going? He made a face. The New Eocene site, where he was planting his climate change forest, had been clear-cut by a logging company and then placed under a covenant, which stipulated that any subsequent reforestation be limited to species that were native to the extant geoclimatic zone. His trees were deemed to be exotic and thus in violation of the covenant. Neither Oliver nor his botanist friend who owned the property had been aware of this. Not good, he said. The covenant holder wants me to stop planting, but I'm arguing that given the rapid onset of climate change, we need to radically redefine the term native and expand it to include formerly, and even prehistorically, native species. He looked discouraged. Semantics, he said. So stupid. As though in agreement, the jungle crow gave a harsh caw, and Callie laughed. See, she said. He's acclimating. Don't be surprised if our island xenophobes storm this place, armed with nets and kerosene torches. Ruth looked up in the tree at the outline of the crow in the darkness. Did you hear that? She called. You better watch out. The crow flapped its wings and hopped along the branch, sending a shower of water raining down onto Callie's head. Hey, she said, wiping the wet from her face. Cut it out. I'm on your side. She turned to Ruth. They're very clever. Did you know? Ruth held up her hand. I know, she said, but Callie carried on. That in Sliaman mythology they're magical ancestors who can shapeshift and change into human form? You don't say, Ruth said. Callie grinned. You should get Muriel to tell you about it sometime. That night in bed Ruth read the day's allotment out loud from the diary. Pesto lay on Oliver's stomach, purring, while Oliver stared up at the ceiling and rubbed the cat's forehead. She read the part about Now's funeral and the video that went up on the internet. Gone, gone, gone beyond, gone completely beyond. The story of the bullying made him angry. I hate that, he said. How could the school allow that to happen? How could that teacher participate? Ruth didn't have an answer. Pesto stopped purring and looked uneasily at Oliver. But it makes total sense, Oliver said, glumly. We live in a bully culture. Politicians, corporations, the banks, the military. All bullies and crooks. They steal, they torture people, they make these insane rules and set the tone. She slipped her hand between the pillow and his head and kneaded the nape of his neck. The cat reached up a paw and laid it on his chin. Look at Guantanamo, he said. Look at Abu Ghraib. America's bad, but Canada's no better. People just going with the program, too scared to speak up. Look at the tar sands. Just like TEPCO. I fucking hate it. He turned over on his side, pitching the cat onto the mattress. The cat jumped off the bed and left. After Oliver fell asleep, Ruth got up and went to the window. Somewhere out there, the crow perched in the boughs. Their crepuscular crow. She couldn't see it, but she liked the thought of the black crow hidden in the shadows. She wondered if it had managed to make friends with the ravens yet. She crawled back into bed and drifted off. That night, she had the second of her nun dreams. It was the same temple. The same darkened room with the torn paper screen, the same old nun, dressed in long black robes, seated at the desk on the floor. Outside, the same moonlight shimmered softly in the garden, only now in the distance, beyond the garden gate, Ruth could dimly make out what looked like the outline of a cemetery, its jaggedy silhouette of stupas and stones, stark against the pale night sky. Inside the room, the harsh, cold light from the computer illuminated the old nun's face, making her look haggard and sickly. She looked up from the screen. She was wearing the black glasses that were similar to the ones Ruth wore. She took them off and rubbed her tired eyes, and then she spotted Ruth. Unfurling the wide black wing of her sleeve, she beckoned, calling her closer, and then Ruth was beside her. The nun held out her glasses, and Ruth, realizing that she'd left hers on the bedside table, took them. She knew she had to put them on. She blinked. The lenses were thick and murky. Her eyes would need a moment to adjust. No, this wouldn't do. The nun's lenses were too thick and strong, smearing and dismantling the whole world as she knew it. She started to panic. She tried to pull the glasses from her face, but they were stuck there, and as she struggled, the smear of the world began to absorb her, swirling and howling like a whirlwind and casting her back into a place or condition that was unformed, that she couldn't find words for. How to describe it? Not a place, but a feeling of non-being, sudden, dark, and prehuman, which filled her with such an inchoate horror that she cried out and brought her hands to her face, only to find that she no longer had one. There was nothing there. No hands, no face, no eyes, no glasses, no Ruth at all. Nothing but a vast and empty ruthlessness. She screamed but no sound emerged. She strained into the vastness, pressing into a direction that felt like forward or even through, but without a face there was no forward, or backward, either. No up, no down. No past, no future. There was just this eternal sense of merging and dissolving into something unaimable that went on in all directions, forever. And then she felt something, a feather-like touch, and she heard something that sounded like a chuckle and a snap, and in an instant, her dark terror vanished and was replaced by a sense of utter calm and well-being. Not that she had a body to feel, or eyes to see, or ears to hear, but somehow she experienced all these sensations, nevertheless. It was like being cradled in the arms of time itself, and she stayed suspended in this blissful state for an eternity or two. When she awoke to an insipid beam of winter sunlight filtering in through the bamboo outside her window, she felt oddly at peace and well rested.